Welcome to our JavaScript web course. In this video, we will learn about DOM events and event objects. First, let's review some concepts that we have learned about JavaScript. The JavaScript language contains objects, properties, methods, and events. The objects are primarily content on the page. Those objects have properties which are characteristics. The objects also have methods, which are things the objects can do, and they also have events. Events are things that happen to these objects, more commonly referred to as user events. When we access the objects and methods, we employ what is called the dot syntax. So here we have a very familiar statement, document.getElementById.InnerHTML, where we have the document object dot a method dot a property. Methods will always be followed by parentheses, properties will not. We've already learned how to click on something and call a function. So here we have some HTML for a button. And now we are using JavaScript to make a reference to that button. So now we have the object dot onClick equals function name. Now onClick can be referred to as the event handler, which is handling the click event. Some books refer to the function name as the event handler. In this statement, onClick is being used as a property. We also can call an anonymous function. So using the same setup, here we have object.onClick equals, and we have the function keyword, and inside the curly braces, the code would be executed rather than calling a function name. So again, we have object dot, essentially the event, equals a function. Again, the function can be also referred to as the event handler or the event listener. So these terms are thrown around and sometimes they're interchanged. I would like to point out once again that in the early days of JavaScript, we used the onClick as an HTML attribute, placing it right inside the HTML element. You will see that in the book. You will see that on the web. That is the old approach. It is not allowed in this class. So here is a list of common JavaScript events. We have the load event and the onLoad event handler, meaning the page has loaded. We have the unload event and the onUnload event handler, meaning the page has closed, the tab has closed, the user has left the page. We have the click event, the onClick event handler, which we're familiar with. The user clicks on an element. We also have a double click event. We have a context menu event, which essentially means the user attempted to open a context menu. Typically, this is done by a right mouse click. We have a key press event, which means the user typed a character. We also have some more specific variations of key press that are in the book. We have the mouse over and the mouse out events, the user moving over and away from an element. There are also some additional mouse events. Mouse events are not that common anymore. They were in the earlier days of JavaScript. The form elements. There are a lot of events connected to form elements, and we will look at forms in more detail later on. We have the focus and blur events, the concept of clicking into an element and out of an element. We have the select event, the input event, the change event, and the reset and submit event, which are tied in to the reset and submit buttons. In the document object model, we have what is called event propagation. This model dictates the order in which events happen when an event occurs in an element that is inside another element, and both elements have a registered handler for that event. So let me explain this. This has to do with a parent-child relationship, and both elements have the same event registered, for example, a click. So if you look at this code here, we have a parent and a child. Now, if I were to click on the child, I'm automatically clicking on the parent. There's no way around that. That's the way it works. So if they both have a click event registered, what is the order in which those events are going to fire? There are two different ways in which these events can be propagated. The first is by what is called bubbling. The second is by what's called capturing. In bubbling, the event is first captured by the innermost element and then propagated upwards to the outer elements. In capturing, the event starts at the outermost elements and works its way down to the inner element that was first the recipient of that event. So here I have an example. I have three divs. I have an outer, an inner, and an inmost. It's pretty obvious to see that if you click on inmost, you're also clicking on inner. And if you click on inner, you're obviously also clicking on outer because of the parent-child relationship here. In event bubbling, if I clicked on the inmost div here in yellow, that event would fire first, then inner, then outer. In event capturing, if I were to click on the inmost div first, which is yellow, the outer would fire first, then the inner, then the inmost. So it does the opposite. It all depends on where the first event originated. We also have what is called an add event listener method. This will attach the event to an element. So here I have document.addEventListener. It takes three parameters: the name of the event, the name of the function or the anonymous function, and a value for useCapture. UseCapture is Boolean, true or false. The default is false. So if you leave that blank, you are essentially saying false to using capture. We just explained what capture is. Okay, therefore, if it's left blank, we're going to be using the bubbling in the event that the right situation occurs. If you want to use capture, then you put true there. So this is where that bubbling capture model comes in that we just looked at. And because most people use bubbling, you don't even have to worry about it. All you need to do is to add the event and the function. So let's take a look at how we use this method. Here we have a reference to an object, and the variable is the button. What we have been doing, the button.onClick equals function name. We're pretty comfortable with this. All right, how would we translate that into this using this method? All right, so here we have the button.addEventListener, in parentheses, the name of the event, which is quoted, comma, the function name. The function name is never in quotes. Here's how you would use addEventListener. Notice we do not need a third parameter because we are taking the default, and in the event that we have a parent-child relationship where several of the elements have the same event assigned to them, we will be using the bubbling model. Now I have several examples using the anonymous function. So here we have the button.onClick calling the anonymous function, and the code inside the curly braces will execute. Now I have the same statement using addEventListener calling the anonymous function. I also have the same statement using addEventListener calling the anonymous function using the arrow function expression, because you will see that on the web a lot. So what's the advantage on using add-event-listener? All right, number one, onClick is a property. It can get overwritten. Add-event-listener is a DOM method. We have more control over the propagation. The add-event-listener will allow us to attach multiple events to the same element. For example, if I wanted to add a click and a double-click event calling the same function, I can do that with add-event-listener. We also have the ability to move the event listener. I am just demonstrating the syntax. It is the same as add-event-listener, only it's remove. Typically, that would probably occur somewhere in a function after the event has been executed. Finally, we have what is called the event object. So every time an event occurs, an event object is created. By creating that object, we can learn more about the event, such as which mouse button was clicked, such as which element triggered that event. There are also many properties and methods of the event object which we can access using the event object. We can find out the name of the event, the element that triggered the event. We actually can prevent the default action, such as a hyperlink taking you to a URL. And we also can stop propagation. This is the syntax for how you would use the event object. And here I have a link, ahref, and now I have a variable to reference that link. Okay, so the link.onClick, this is our traditional what we've been doing, and we're going to call this anonymous function here. In the parentheses, we're going to pass it the letter E. It represents the event object because ultimately we're going to call an event method or event property on it. And in this case, e.preventDefault, therefore I'm preventing the default action of this link. So if you look at the link, it is no longer going to the W3C page. It's just going to do whatever else is in the function. This is similar to passing a parameter to a function. The difference is that when we pass a parameter, we just are passing a value. Here we are executing a property or method on it, so therefore the browser knows it's an event. The next example, add-event-listener. With our anonymous function, we pass the E into the function. We use that E to execute a method. The next example, using the arrow function syntax, the E goes inside the parentheses. The E is used to execute the method. Some developers don't use the letter E. Some use the word event. All right, so again, it's the same thing. It's a parameter passed to the function, and because we are executing an event property or method on it, it recognizes it as essentially the event object. So you might see the word event inside the parentheses. You might see the letters EVT inside the parentheses for event. You might see the letters EV inside the parentheses. You might see the letter E. They all represent the event object, so I just don't want you to be confused because you'll see different variations of it out there on the web and in books.